Hey, what's going on, guys, and welcome back to another video. So today we are back with another tier list video, and this time, instead of talking about the best overall civs, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the best unique units in the game. And so even if there's a civ that's quite bad overall, if it has a good unique unit, that will have a higher place on this particular tier list. Before we hop into that, though, I just want to say that I was pleasantly surprised with the amount of activity on the last tier list video. We had somewhere like north of 70k views in only 7 days. So in 1 week, it became my most viewed video, which is just amazing. I didn't know you guys liked this kind of content this much, but based on the positive feedback, I decided to just throw in another one a week later. I think like 8 or 9 days later now. But yeah, obviously going in a different direction this time with the unique units. So let's see exactly how I'm going to grade these civs. So first off, my first criteria is going to be how powerful the unique unit is in general. So at all stages of the game. That's the first criteria. Second one is how dependent is that civ on its unique unit. For example, is that unique unit, like if we take away the unique unit, does the civ suddenly become significantly worse, or does it still function without it? That's number two. And then the third criteria is also how early does that civilization tech into the unique unit. So for some civs, they'll have a strong option, but it's going to be a situational one. But for other civs, they're going to want to go into that unique unit as fast as possible, even from the start of Castle Age. We're using a little bit of different overlay now. I'm going to keep the webcam over on the top. I'm going to go in front for the tier list here. I'm going to full screen. So let me just make sure. Okay, that covers up a little bit of it. So let me see if I can find a position for this this webcam here. Let's see if I could do it like this. All right, so give me some feedback on the webcam. Whether you guys like the position or not, or whether you guys don't care for the webcam in these kind of videos. Okay, so that's going to be that. Let's let's hop finally into the tier list. All right. So for the S tier, there is actually only two civs this time around that comes to mind. I valued, or I took some time to think about the other ones, but I came up with the first one being the Mayans. Yes, plumed archers. I know there's the meme that I said they were trash, but hear me out. Yes, they got a cost increase. However, they are still the go-to unit for Mayans in the late game. Furthermore, Mayans often want to tech into this unit from the start of Castle Age, if possible. And third of all, if you remove plumed archers from Mayans, then they become significantly weaker. So this literally fits all of my criteria, and it's just one of the most dominant unique units in the game. Just a fast-moving, high HP archer with a lot of pierce armor. It doesn't get better than this. It has fast fire rate, it's really smooth to micro, and it's overall cheap, even with the cost decrease. So yeah, I know I said it was useless or trash or whatever you guys heard, but it's still an S tier unit for me. And the second one, and I think the best current unique unit in the game, the Mangudai. I feel like the Mangudai does it all. Like, not only is it a fast, relatively cheap, it's not that expensive compared to like an elephant archer or something like that. The Mangudai is fast, it's relatively cheap, has good DPS, good fire rate, it's smooth to micro, and it benefits from a lot of important upgrades like Bloodlines, Husbandry, that just further make it a strong Castle Age unit. And then on top of all that, it also has a bonus damage for siege, so it doesn't die to siege ram like other unique units that we'll talk about on this list. So these two, for me, I think they exceed expectations compared to the other civs, and they deserve the S tier spot. So now going down to the A tier, you're going to notice in the A tier, compared to the S tier, is that these units are still really good. However, they are a little bit more situational, or they take a little bit longer to get going. Like the Mangudai and the plumed archers, you can go straight into them no problem. These ones, usually you want to play with other stuff first. So starting off our list, we have the Berbers with the Camel Archer. Camel Archer reminds me a little bit of Mangudai in that it's a, again, relatively cheap horse unit, horse archer, that has high attack, high mobility, but it's just slightly worse, mainly because it has a more fire delay. It takes a little bit longer to shoot, so it's not as smooth to micro, and it's missing that attack bonus versus siege, so it actually loses to siege ram and siege onagers quite a lot in the late game. So it's simply not as flexible as the Mangudai is, and that therefore takes a spot less, but it's still a very strong unit in its own right. And even does some things better in comparison to the Mangudai. Like I think if you pair them head on head, then I guess the Camel Archer will actually win that. Next up is going to be the Britton Longbowman. I think a fan favorite. I made a video of this with 200 longbows. I don't know if you guys have seen that one. But, you know, longbow is definitely a unit that is quite strong, especially when massed. It's, again, not a unit that Britons necessarily have to rush out. And I think that Britons are still a fine civ without this unit. But it's still such a powerful unit in the late game with 12 range, which is the most on an archer unit, and really high attack, which makes it usually the better choice over the Arbalest in the late game, having that extra range and extra attack. And I just think that it's overall a really solid unit. It's quite cheap to make as well. Okay, next up, Burmese. Yeah, Burmese is a pretty bad civ, in my opinion, at least, as you guys saw from my previous tier list. I think they made only the D tier because the civ has some pretty strong weaknesses. However, the Arambai is probably one of their best strengths. This unit is so strong against melee units, and it's just kind of unmatched at the start of Castle Age. You need range units to be able to deal with this unit, and not only range units, I'd say you probably need range units and the ballistic upgrade to be able to chase them down as they run around your base. The reason why, you know, Burmese are so strong, or Arambai are so strong in general, is because you don't need a lot of upgrades for them to get going. So yes, they're quite costly. I think they cost a little bit more than, say, a Camel Archer or a Mangadai. Could be wrong, because they've gotten a lot of cost changes recently. However, you don't need a lot of upgrades for it to get going, meaning that as soon as it gets out of the castle, you don't need fletching, you don't need bark and arrow. In fact, it only benefits from 1 archer armor from the blacksmith, and other than that, it's good to go. Sure, you can have some, you know, stable upgrades like bloodlines and husbandry, but even without those, it's still a very good unit. So it's quick out the gate, very strong, and amazing versus most melee and cavalry units. Only dies to like cav archers and archers, again with ballistics, very important. Alright, next up is going to be the Chukunu from the Chinese. The reason this unit is not S tier, while I think it's very good, it lacks the mobility that the other unique units have, and therefore it's only a unit that comes into play in the late game. However, that being said, it's still the best, by far, option that the Chinese can field in the late game in terms of an archer unit. Like, they have fully upgraded Arbalest, of course, but the Chukunu just does way better than Arbalest. It also deals with rams very effectively, so it doesn't die to siege ram. Very important in an archer unit in late game. Its biggest weakness is probably the siege onager. It does okay versus skirmishers, and it just has great DPS in general, which is damage per second. So it's a great backline unit. Definitely worth A tier for me. Not quite enough mobility for S tier, but you know, still up there. All right, next up is going to be the Cumans for the Kipchak. Okay, so I actually debated putting this up to S tier. The reason being, it's high mobility, very smooth to micro, and it's just kind of really strong in Castle Age, right? It feels like it has very little, especially with the recent buff, very little weaknesses in Castle Age. However, I didn't go that far because I felt like if I compared it to the Plumed Archer and the Mangadai, it just was missing something. Like, the Kipchak just doesn't feel as versatile and as strong as those units. And so therefore I bumped it, you know, a step down. It also doesn't feel like you need to go for this if you're playing as a Cumans. Like, I feel like Cumans have enough other options that even if they lose the Kipchak, they still, you know, can be relatively strong these days as well. Although it's pretty important in the early Castle Age, it's probably their best unit that they can go for. So yeah, Cumans, Kipchak, A tier for me, but I considered it for S tier for a second. All right, next up, oh, look at that, the Goths not on F tier. Who would have thought? Okay, so yeah, the Husk Girl is making an appearance, and it's actually, it fits the description, right? It's one of those units where you want to go into it as fast as possible. Generally, when you get to Castle Age, you drop a castle and you go into it. Or if you want to wait to the late game, you would just flood Husk Girl, and that's like their main unit. If you take Husk Girls away from the Goths, you might as well just take Goths out of the game. They are nothing. They are nothing. But they're even less without the Husk Girl. That's my statement as to, you know, regards to Goths these days. Although I know there's a lot of Goths fans out there. I'm sorry, the Civ is not the best right now, but the Husk Girl is very strong. Great Pierce Armor, great mobility, very cheap, easy to spam. It's just an overall great unit. I would have put it S tier, but again, I felt like it was a step below the Mangadai and the Plumed Archer. But you could make a very strong argument for this to be S tier, in my opinion. Alright, next up is going to be the Koreans. Yes, I think that War Wagons are a very strong unit, and I think that now that they got a cost decrease with the recent Korean, you know, bonus update, they cost less wood. That was a while ago, but it's not that recent, but it's with DE. They cost less wood, and I think the only problem with this unit is that it was expensive. Now it's a lot cheaper, still expensive, but it definitely is worth it. Like, this unit has a ton of HP. It's a little clunky to maneuver, but it has, pretty good mobility and has a decent amount of DPS as well. So, it's still up there for me. And it's a big part of the Korean death ball, I think. When you think of their best late game composition, War Wagons is definitely an argument there. So, War Wagons could be good in Castle Age, could be good in Imperial Age, and are a really important part for Koreans late game, in my opinion, in a lot of cases. All right, next up is going to be the Spanish with the Conquistador, if I can find it. There it is. This is, of course, alphabetically. I don't have any preferences between these civs in between their tiers, unless the ones I suggested for S tier. Those are a little bit higher up for me, but the rest should be just all A tier. I'm putting them alphabetical order. So this one is going to be the Spanish with the Conquistador. This unit recently with DE again made it so the skirmishers deal more damage to it. And since skirmishers deal more damage to it, it's actually very easy to counter it in the Castle Age as compared to before DE was released in Warlord Kingdoms and in the Vubli times. In the Vubli times, I would consider Conquistador S tier, probably one of the best unique units, if not the best unique unit in the game. But now, since there's an answer in early castle, it's not really that great a unit in Imperial Age. Don't get me wrong, it's still very powerful, but in Imperial Age, there's a lot of other options for other civs that come up and are just as strong. However, for me, it still deserves an A tier because it's once you get a good mass in Castle Age with Conk Mangonel kind of combination, it's very strong and hard to stop. And it's honestly an iconic unit for the Spanish. Like, the civ doesn't really have anything special besides the Conquistador for most of the game. They have an open tech tree in late game, sure, but until then, Conquistador is definitely carrying the civ. All right, next up we got the Turks. Yes, the Janissary, kind of like the Conquistador actually. It's very strong, quick out the gate, and is not too bad in the late game as well. Although in Imperial Age, other civs get better options to counter it. However, in Castle Age, when masked, Janissary plus Mangonel is very hard to stop. And again, similar to Spanish with the Conch, Turks lose a lot if they lose access to Janissary because that's one of their main Castle Age options. And it sees quite a lot of play as well in competitive play, or at least in high-level play when Turks are picked. This is definitely one of the units that you think of immediately. All right, next up is going to be the Vietnamese with the Rattan Archer. Now, I didn't know exactly where to place the Rattan Archer because it's actually very clunky to use, and it's because this is the reason. So it's kind of hard to explain, but it doesn't shoot as fast as the other unique units like the Plumed Archer or the Mangudai or the Kipchak. It has a lot more fire delay, which makes it like awkward to micro. However, it has pretty high damage, higher than a crossbow, and it's also pretty fast moving as well. Again, not as high mobility as the Plumed Archer, but it's still faster than a crossbow. So it's a unit that you can go into right off the bat in Castle Age, but it really shines in Imperial Age with a lot of Pierce Armor, and it can be insane in certain matchups because a lot of civs struggle to take it out, take out that high Pierce Armor, decent mobility Archer in the late game. And so I think that, a unit that is okay in Castle Age and amazing in late game, and definitely a big part of why Vietnamese can keep up with the higher tier civs in late game these days. And I think that, the Rattan Archer definitely deserves a spot in A tier. Okay, my last civ here is going to be the Vikings. Yes, the KP boys actually make a pretty significant appearance here. And it's one of the only melee units to actually make the cut in A tier. It's only the Husk Girl and the Berserk. So why the Berserk? I think that this unit is one of the best infantry unique units on versus melee units. So normally, like Husk Girl, they will struggle against melee units, and if you think about like Woad Raider as well, they're not great versus cavalry. However, the Berserker is not only good against other infantry, but it's also good against cavalry because of the Chieftain tech. So it pretty much dominates most melee or melee matchups. Versus Cavalier it does well, versus Champion it does well, versus Eagles it does well. And Vikings is a civ that can really utilize the Berserk because it has such a high high cost, but also backed with a great economy because of the Vikings. So I think if you give the Berserk to a civ that has no eco bonus, it could be not as good. But since it's with the Vikings who can actually afford to tech into it, it suddenly becomes an A tier on my list. All right, so dropping down to B tier, these civilizations you're going to notice are, have pretty good unique units, but they're going to be a lot more situational, and they're going to be like usually only good when they're masked or in like a certain stage of the game. So it's not as flexible as the A or S tier were. First off, I got the Conics from the Bulgarians. Yes, I think that the Conics, I mean, I think it was once a really maybe even overpowered units, but since it got nerfed a couple patches ago, it lost some HP and some attack rates or attack speed. And so I think a B tier spot for it is good. I mean, it still has, it still is a very powerful unit in the late game. However, it's not something you want to go into at the start of Castle Age, and it's something that takes a lot of upgrades to get, to make good use out of. However, it's still a very strong option, and it's significantly better than, say, going, Cavalier or Paladin with the Civ. So Conic for me definitely deserves a slot here. In a similar place, you're gonna have the Woad Raiders for the Celts here. So when I say similar, I mean that you don't want to rush into Woad Raiders if you're Celts. Normally you have other options to play with in Castle Age. However, the Elite Woad Raider in the Imperial Age is a very nice unit. It pretty much only loses versus other top tier unique units. If you're talking about like a head-on fight with other melee units. Like the Berserker will obviously shred the Woad Raider. However, the Woad Raider is still very fast moving, high DPS. It's much better than the Champion. Try them out in equal combat. I know the stats look the same, but the Woad Raider is much better, trust me. And it's quite easy to tech into because they simply produce very fast from the castle. So Woad Raider, definitely up there for me. Next up, we got the Throwing Axeman from the Franks. One of their more important units in the late game, I think. Because generally we think of Franks as a cavalry civilization, but having access to the Throwing Axeman covers their weak point, which is like pikemen and halberdier. And so Throwing Axeman can be used in Castle Age with their cheaper castles, and is also a very strong unit in the Imperial Age. I think the biggest weaknesses for it are, mobile archers like cav archers, or higher range archers, say the longbow. They're also relatively weak to onagers, but they have a high HP, so they can tank a couple shots potentially. Next up, we have the Huns. Yeah, Huns have the Tarkans, which on paper look like just a weaker paladin. However, the reason I have Tarkans up here is because of the unique tech Marauders. So Marauders makes it that you can make the Tarkans from the stable. Not only that, their elite upgrade is much cheaper than Paladin, and it produces much faster. Like you can get into it a lot quicker than it takes to get Paladin, which first you have to research Cavalier, and then Paladin, which is a very long upgrade. And so similar to the Conic, there is actually a reason to play with the Tarkan more so than the Paladin. For the Conic, this is the difference. It was actually just simply a better unit than the Paladin late game. It had more potential. But for the Tarkan, it's simply a quicker option to tech into than the Paladin. And if you don't have the time to go for Paladin, going for Tarkan is a nice little replacement. Also, it has an extra Pierce Armor. It has 4 Pierce Armor base. Paladin only has 3, Cavalier only 2. So versus Archer units and versus buildings, not to mention its attack bonus versus buildings, Tarkans is great and is actually a better option than the Paladin. So definitely B tier for me. And it sees a decent amount of play in 1v1s. Alright, next up is going to be the Incas with the Mamelukes. Mamelukes are not just a replacement for Halberdier. They do a lot of damage when masked, even versus, standard like infantry, like champions that Halberdier are generally weak against. So Mamelukes, I think, are an overall really well-rounded unit. And the reason I don't have them higher is simply because it's not a unit you go into in Castle Age. It's only good in Imperial Age when masked, and even then it has some weaknesses. However, with Couriers, or as we saw from a recent team game, I think it's called Fabric Shields now, which is the Inca unique tech, to give it an extra +1/+1 in the armor department. So +1 melee armor and +1 pierce armor. Okay, next up, there's a lot of civs in the B tier, by the way. Next up is going to be the Italians. So Genoese crossbows, they are interesting. They do more damage than regular crossbows, so you can already have some sort of argument to make them in Castle Age, albeit they are lacking 1 range compared to the crossbow. However, this unit mostly shines in Imperial Age, where if you get all the upgrades for the Italians, including their unique unit or unique upgrade that gives foot archers +1 armor, Genoese crossbow actually become a pretty strong unit, especially against Cav, all Cav, Hussar, Cav Archers, Paladin, all that good stuff, and are significantly better than Arbalest. So I think for that situational reason, I have to give this a B tier. It's a solid unit and has a specialty and is great at that specialty as well. Alright, next up we got the Japanese with the Samurai. I debated between B and C tier for this one. I decided with B tier because it is a very good option to tech into in certain situations. So against other melee unique units like the Woad Raider, like the Huskarl, and even like the Berserk. However, the Samurai isn't really the kind of unit you want to go into early. It's more of a late game option, and it's not that big a powerhouse, you know. It's it's a solid option, but you can easily go for champion and have similar results, right? So for me, I only put Samurai up here because it had a good situation to use it in, and also it creates really fast from the castle, so it could make for an easy transition potentially in the Imperial Age. Next up, I've got the Magyars. Yes, Magyar Hussar. The only reason I didn't put this at A tier actually is because it's usually not their main unit. Usually this is a supporting unit, and therefore, you can make an argument to replace it with a regular Hussar. However, in my opinion, this trumps the regular Hussar on multiple levels. The attack bonus for Siege is really nice. It simply has better stats than the Hussar, and it creates relatively fast from the castle as well. And after you get the unique tech, it obviously costs no gold as well. So definitely deserves number B tier slots. Would be A if it was their main unit. Unfortunately, it's just more of a supporting unit. Usually something you tech into second. And the last B tier unique unit is going to be the Gebetto from the Mayans. Yes. And I realize I'm saying yes a lot to start it off. It's just the easiest transition. But the Gebetto is kind of like a fast-moving throwing axeman in the sense that it does melee damage. However, it is also a ranged unit. However, the Gebetto has different strengths and weaknesses. So it obviously is more mobile because it moves faster, but it has less HP, and I believe, and it has more range as well. So two bonuses, one negative. I'm not sure how they fare head to head throwing axeman versus Gebetto. I think Spirit of the Law somewhere has a video on that. But for me, they have different strengths and weaknesses, and for that reason, I think that having them both in B tier is no problem. They are enough different, I think, to justify both of them. Okay, so that's going to be it for the B tier. Now, moving on to C tier, you're going to notice in these civilizations, first of all, it's going to be way less of them, and second of all, it's going to be units that are very much situational. Now, they could be really powerful options in certain cases, but they're just not seen as much as the other ones, and not that important to the civilization. First up on the list is going to be the Byzantine Cat Effect. Now, Cat Effects are a great late game option, and oftentimes better than Paladin for late game Byzantine if you want to go for a Cav option. However, it's just not a unit that is really good outside of what it is good at, which is to counter anti-cavalry options like Halberdier and like even the Genoese crossbow, as I discovered recently. And I think that the reason I didn't put it any higher is because of its just absurd cost. It costs so much to upgrade this unit, with the trample damage, unique tech costing tons, and the elite upgrade also costing tons. I don't know the exact number, but I know it's a lot. And for that reason, it's still stuck at C tier. It's just too much of an investment to go into it, although it's quite a strong unit in my opinion. Portuguese is going to be the next one up here. Now, organ guns in the base game, or in Wool Kingdoms on Rubli, or on HD rather, I think the organ guns were a lot stronger. They feel just weaker on DE. I don't know if it's just me. They feel weaker, they're not seen as much, and they're a lot more clunky to control. And for that reason, I had to drop them to C tier, whereas normally I'd have them at B or A even, because I think that they're objectively a pretty strong unit. But they're countered easily by archers. They can get awkward to micro, so they can lose fights to Cav if you're not paying too much attention. The benefit is that you don't need a lot of upgrades, and they're strong right out the castle, and they do a lot of damage. So if you control them well, they have potential, but I think just too hard to control and too situational for me to go for it. Alright, next up is going to be the Saracen Mameluke, an extremely powerful unit, but I think it has some great weaknesses, and it's also really expensive, and that's why I couldn't put it any higher than C tier. Although in the late game, it's probably one of the best Saracen options to go for, especially in team games where you have the trade flowing and the gold isn't a problem. But overall, 85 gold for a unit that is only good when massed, so you need to really invest into it. Probably not the best option in most cases. So definitely C tier for me. And then finally here, the last C tier civ is going to be the Malay with the Karambit Warrior. Karambit Warrior, with the weak melee pathing of DE, it can be a little bit awkward to control because it's a unit that strives in great mass. Of course, they only take up half a population, so you need at least like 40 to 50 of them to really have some sort of presence. But it just feels like they bump too much. They don't get the right spread that they need to be effective. And I only put them at C tier because I do think that they have a situation where they can be very useful because they are so cheap and they produce so fast. But I just don't see them as a great option for Malay late game, and for that reason, even C might be generous. Maybe they deserve D tier. I'll let you guys be the judge of that. I decided for C. Alright, so moving swiftly on to D tier. Now, for the D tier, you're going to see a lot of civs that their unique unit is either way too expensive to get into, or to even make, or just not that useful for the civilization. It has some situational benefits, but it's just not as strong as other options. And if you take it away from the civ, usually the civ will be just fine or just as bad, regardless, with or without the unit. First up, you have the Jackal Warrior for the Aztecs. Now, while the Jackal Warrior is really good versus infantry, it doesn't have very high mobility. It costs a fair amount to tech into. And it just, outside of Aztec mirrors, it doesn't really see that much play, and oftentimes there's way better options for Aztecs. So for me, D tier, I can't find a better use for it, or a good use for it, aside from Aztec mirror match, where it's actually a strong unit. But you know, Jaguar Warrior plus Skirmisher. But outside of that, in a 1v1, it doesn't really have that much use for me. Similarly, is going to be the Shuttle Warrior for the Ethiopians. Now, like it has its use. It's a high damage, low HP, fast producing unit, kind of like the Karambit Warrior, but it's just something that Ethiopians don't really rely on too much, and it's not something that really sees too much play. Maybe you can make an argument to bump it to C tier, similar to the Karambits, but for me, it's just something that usually you don't want to go into, and I think Ethiopians have overall better options. It's really weak to archers. It kind of dies to cav as well, and it only is really good against those like fluffy infantry units like the Eagle Warrior, perhaps, that you can chase down because they run quite fast as well, the Shotels. But yeah, D tier for me, maybe an argument for C tier, depends on who you ask. Okay, next up is going to be the Qamar. I think Viper's probably nodding in disapproval here, or shaking his head rather in disapproval. However, the Ballista Elephant, just for me, is just too expensive to really go into most of the time. While I do agree it's a powerful unit when masked, it even has a lot of counters in the late game. Monks with plus 3 range, so 12 range. Qamar don't get heresy, so that's going to be a very good counter. They die to, I think, siege onagers. They die to long range archers like Mangadai or Camel Archers or longbows. Not even long range, just medium range archers they'll die to, or cavalry archers. They do trade well versus Arbalest. They just cost way too much and are too clunky to use. So I think that you need to be really skilled to make them work, and they're also just too expensive and not that versatile in general. Next up, I've got the Lightest. Now, the Lightest is not necessarily a bad unit. I only have it here because it doesn't really have anything that the Cav or the Paladin like already provides. Like, sure, it ignores melee armor, so it can be decent in certain situations, but it costs quite a lot to tech into. It requires castles, and it has weaker stats than the Paladin overall. So for me, it's not something I can really justify going for too much. I do recognize it has some use, and it's not a terrible unit to make if you know, in just a few numbers and castle age if you really need it. But it's not something that you really want to go for if you're Lithuanians. All right, Persian Elephant. It was just bound to come up eventually. It's sad to put it so low because it's such a beastly unit, but unfortunately it is just way too expensive to tech into. And similar to the Ballista Elephant, it has too many counters. Monks, again, Persians don't have heresy. They counter their elephant too much. Halberdiers shred them, and they do okay versus archers, but I think that, you know, their low mobility, their slow movingness makes them not the best option in a lot of cases. The only reason I have it at D tier, not F tier, is because it's still a super powerful option in late game, and it's still like pop effectiveness. If you have like an army of 100 elephants, if you can somehow get there, they're still really powerful. So they're very effective for their population, very powerful in general. And in late game team games, when you have a lot of resources, it's an option that Persians will go for. So very situational in late game. However, it's not a bad unit if you have a combination of it, but on its own, it does very little. All right, next up we have the Slabs. Slabs, kind of like the lightest. It's like it doesn't really have a purpose. Now, like for Slabs, you really have no reason to go for the Boyar compared to just the Cavalier or the Hussar. And while you might say, oh, dude, it has a lot of melee armor. It's a great unit. It even beats Cavalier or Paladin. I don't even know. 1v1. It's flawed in design in that it dies to Halberdier. Like Halberdier is the counter to Cav in general. So why have a special Cav unit that has a lot of melee armor that still dies to Halberdier? It's even weaker against range units than the Paladin is, because I think it's missing an extra Pierce armor. It only has 2 base for the Elite Boyar. Could be wrong, don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. And so for me, it just doesn't have any use that the Paladin or the Cavalier can't cover. Now, I know Slabs don't get Paladin, but Hussar and Cavalier, in my opinion, normally are better than the Boyar and are a lot easier to tech into as well. All right, I know this video is getting kind of long, but just 3 more civs here. Next up we have... oh, did I forget to talk about a civ? Oh my god, I made a mistake. Oh, I have not done the Tatars justice here. The Tatars, with their Keshiks, I actually don't have them here. I'm just talking to the technical crew right now. Tatars are in the B tier. Yes, the Keshiks actually make the B tier here. A little glitch in the system. I'm going to fire the technical guy. He just didn't warn me in time. However, Keshiks recently got buffed to the point where I think that they're actually a pretty strong, unique unit. They have a lot of pierce armor. They're cheap, easy to make, easy to use. Definitely stronger than the Knights in Castle Age because of just them being cheaper. And you can make a really solid argument going for Keshiks over Cavalier in late game. So for me, you know what? Maybe even A tier now that I'm thinking about it. I'm going to put it in A tier actually because of the same reasons. But I think it just sees more play. It's more important to the Tatars than a lot of these units are for their civs in the B tier. So Keshik right up there in the A tier for me. And that's going to be before the Berserk. Okay, and before this as well. And before this as well. Okay, sorry about that little glitch. But last 2 civs here, Teutons are in the D tier. Yes, the Teutonic Knights make the D tier. Who would have thought Teutons actually not last in something? Hear me out. Teutonic Knights, while they are a pretty bad unit and more or less a meme unit in a lot of cases, they still have a pretty good use. Now, having an infantry unit with high melee armor is way better than having a cavalry unit with high melee armor because it doesn't have the weakness of dying to halbs. That being said, the slow moviness of the Teutonic Knight makes it die so hard to archers and makes it just awkward to use in general. But it does have a use in certain matchups to be like that slow, strong force that can push, slowly but surely. And for that reason, for me, D tier, it has its uses and it's not completely useless. Basically, is what I want to say here. Lastly, in my opinion, the worst unique unit in the game, simply because it's flawed by design more so than the Boyar, the Elephant Archer. Who would have thought that an immobile, low DPS unit does not make for a good backline archer unit? Yes, the Elephant Archer has a crazy HP. It has like north of 300. But it doesn't have a lot of attack. It doesn't have that impressive of a range. And it just doesn't act as an archer unit role. Like usually the archer units want to be the guys in the back that are really mobile, dealing a lot of damage, and then will just run back and you don't really care about their HP. But Elephant Archers, like, are they supposed to be a frontline unit? I'm not too sure. Their damage output isn't that impressive. Indians don't rely on them that much at all. In fact, I'd say that if you take away this unit, Indians will probably still be at the same spot tier list wise. And it doesn't even have a situation where it's good in. Like, I can't think of a reason where I would really want to make this over other units. So not only is it a bad designed unit or a poorly designed unit, it also is very expensive and hard to tech into. So for that reason, it's by far the worst unit in the game. and or worst unique unit in the game, and definitely deserves the F tier spot and the only F tier spot for this tier list. So I know it was a long video, and I congratulate anyone who made it to the end. However, I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as you enjoyed my last tier list video. Let me know in the comments what you guys want to see next week for another tier list video, if that's something that interests you. I can think of a couple ideas myself, but I don't want to say them just so I don't influence you guys. And just let me know what you guys want to see for another tier list. Hope you guys enjoy this. It's day 16 for our 30 days of YouTube, so we're doing pretty well. But I'll see you guys tomorrow. That's it for me. Take care. Bye for now.